Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on DOT HazMat Awareness and You. My name is Chris Donnell, and I'm the Director of Audit and Support Services here at Alltrans Tech. I'd like to take a moment and introduce our presenters. First, we have Alltrans Tech's Gino Smith. Gino began his transportation career at the Long Beach Naval Shipyard in 1982 as a marine electrician. He has the honor of refurbishing and putting back into service two battleships, the USS New Jersey and the USS Missouri. Prior to Alltrans Tech, he was employed with Amtrak as a passenger car electrician, locomotive electrician, and passenger car supervisor for 9 years. He also worked with the Bureau of Explosives under the AAR as a QA auditor and HazMat inspector. Gino is currently responsible for hazardous materials inspection and 49 CFR hazardous materials education training as Alltrans Tech's manager of HazMat services. Next, I would like to introduce VSP's John Sherman. John graciously lent Alltrans Tech his time to assist us in today's presentation. John began his career in the rail industry 32 years ago. The majority of John's career was spent in various leadership positions within the rail car management sector. Prior to joining the Ride-Tight team, John managed all the transportation equipment, rail, intermodal, and truck for a major chemical manufacturer. John is currently responsible for the day-to-day activities of the Ride-Tight program as VSP's Ride-Tight program administrator. So I just want to take a brief moment to give a little Alltrans Tech overview. Alltrans Tech is one of North America's largest railcar management and consulting companies. We manage over 275,000 rail cars. Our fleet management group serves 100 plus unique customers, managing some of the largest privately owned fleets of Fortune 500 companies. All right, now before we get into it, a few general housekeepings. This presentation will be approximately 45 minutes long to allow for 15 minutes of Q&A. If you have a question at any time during the webinar, please send it via the GoToWebinar question pane. We will address the questions at the end of the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be available via www.alltranstech.com within the next few days. We will also be sending out a brief anonymous survey following the webinar, and we would appreciate your valuable feedback. So without further ado, Gino and John, please take it away.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us. One of the big questions is, why do we have to do this, and where does the regulation stipulate that we must do this? And it begins with 49 CFR, parts 100 through 180. And the specific part that talks about this is in 172-700, which indicates that each HazMat shipper that offers or receives DOT packages must be trained and tested according to 49 CFR. There we go. 171.8 talks about 49 CFR who designate persons or the person who is qualified as a HazMat employer. But the person really incorporates the employer and employee. So we will talk about this a little later about fines and penalty, but who could be fined or penalized is the person, who is someone who transports HazMat, causes HazMat to be transported in commerce, designs, manufactures, inspects a package, a DOT package that's used to transport HazMat in commerce. Okay. The definition of a HazMat employee is anyone who loads, unloads, or handles HazMat. You prepare HazMat shipments for transport. You're responsible for transportation safety, and you requalifies HazMat packaging. And even the individual that operates a vehicle transporting HazMat, whether you're moving HazMat around in your facility, you're still required, or you're still defined as a HazMat employee or the person who offers HazMat for transportation. You shall ensure that each one of those employees are trained according to the subpart C, which is 172.702A, but also 172.702D stipulates that the employer must ensure that the employee is trained and tested based on the parts in 174. So 171 covers definitions and information. 172 is used to communicate your package to whoever's going to receive it or transport it. And 173 is telling the individual how the package must be secured for transportation based on your 172 HazMat material communications. The employer is responsible for training and educating their employees in the regulations that pertain to their specific job function. And the main thing we want to talk about here at All Transtech and VSP is that we focus highly on educating them, not just training them. The training only provides a block of information, but the education part shows that employer how to apply that block of information to make sure that package is in proper condition for transportation. So what are the requirements? That new HazMat employee can work up to 90 days, but 91, he must be trained and tested. You can receive training tested at least once every 3 years, but there is a stipulation where if the employer deems that because the regulations are updated quarterly, that once every 3 years might not be sufficient. So you have the opportunity to do it annual or biannual if you choose to, but it must be done within that 3-year block. And training and testing must be properly documented. So when the regulatory authorities come in and ask for that, there's about 7 items that need to be available for that to validate that the training and testing was done properly. So examination before shipping. Here it is, no person. Well, once again, the person is the company and the employee may offer for transportation a tank car containing HazMat material that's including a residue. So the residue of a package says, I don't have a full package, but that package must still be secured. So we have to treat that package as it's a full load to make sure that we cover all aspects of 173.31D. And then the second part of 173.31D is number 2 called closures. And this is where we get into the term tool tight, which we'll discuss that a little later. But either way, whether it's a full load or residue, it must be in proper condition for transportation. At a minimum, each person offering car for transportation must perform an external visual inspection. Sometimes we see shippers, because of our nature, we like to fix things, but we're not mechanics. We are just an inspector, and then once we note that something's wrong, based on 173.31D, we document that on a specific document checklist, whatever you deem necessary to convey that information that that package is either in proper condition or it needs to be addressed before leaving your facility. So All Transtech, okay, this is the All Transtech. What we do is we come in and we do various assessments. We also offer the education to make sure that your employees or your company is covering everything that needs to be done properly for that car to leave your facility and not have an issue while in transportation. Okay, Chris. So here's an example. An inspection checklist, which is not required by DOT, but is required to make sure that the shipper is covering pamphlet 34 and 173.31D. Real quick, pamphlet 34 is a document located in the Bureau of Explosive Terror. And what pamphlet 34 addresses is suggested recommended practices, which I believe is addressing non-hazardous DOT packages. A tank car is a tank car. The only difference is what you load in a tank car. So if you have a non-hazardous material and you're offering it to the railroad for transportation, it must meet certain criteria. And pamphlet 34 addresses that criteria to make sure that package is in proper condition. So this checklist basically will cover all the items that are needed to make sure that you ensure that your package is in proper condition. Any closures, missing or loose fasteners, a tool-tight condition, and multiple other items on this checklist. You design it, but 49 CFR is the criteria which you will design it to. Non-accidental releases. This is a biggie for the railroad and for shippers. Non-accidental release is caused by inattention to the loading, unloading rack, by not performing a proper inspection before offering the car for transportation. I've always found this interesting. Anytime you have an accident, you have a release, whether it's a car, truck, or whatever the case, antifreeze, transmission fluid, something's going to be released. But in the railroad industry, you have an accident, not an accident, but you have a release. This can cost the company, it can cost the environment, and it will also cost possibly the employee as well. Some of the items: leaky, faulty valves, valves not completely closed, gasket deteriorated, loose fastener, other items. So the bottom line, that checklist that Chris showed everybody is to help that shipper ensure that we do not have any non-accidental releases. We're not perfect, but we're giving a guideline for them to strive to meet this, to make sure we don't have a release into the environment. Okay, John?
Thank you, Gino, and thank you for allowing me to participate in today's discussion. So Gino touched a lot on the specific requirements of HazMat training, and what I'd like to do today is provide you an example of a portion of function-specific training, more specifically into 172.702 and 704. And BSP, as a lot of you are aware, offers manway securement training. And why is it important to add this training to a function-specific training? The very next slide will point that out. The manway, as a lot of you are familiar with, is the #1 cause of NARS for general purpose cars in our industry. Of the 221 total NARS recorded for general purpose cars in 2019, 148 of them were associated with the manway. There's a lot of reasons for that, but I want to point something out, is that gaskets not only have to be chemically compatible, but they need to be mechanically. And a lot of people and companies within our industry are so focused on the chemical compatibility aspect, which obviously they should be, but that's a lot of times where it ends. And so what we try to strive to inform and educate our clients is that there's a whole big part of that that's missing when we don't focus on the mechanical aspects of the gasket as well. Next slide. So a lot of the root causes for manway NARS: human error, not following company standard operating procedures, human error again, company SOPs are inadequate. And we find this a lot, and not necessarily that what they have as far as their standard operating procedures are incorrect. It's just not complete. There's just a lot of information that is skipped over, mainly because they may not be aware of it. The other things that we find are the pre-inspection. We have warped lids, yielded fasteners, and those aren't being identified at the time of loading. And again, two major aspects of it are the gasket, the chemical incompatible, and then also what we find the majority of the time is mechanically incompatible. There's a lot of issues that go on with the type of materials that you use. BOV caps is another area that we see related NARS. Again, almost the same identical root cause failures that we're finding when we're working with our clients to determine what was the cause of that leak. Again, the employee's not following SOPs or the company having inadequate. Other things that we're finding is the inspection. There was damaged threads, burrs on the nozzle of the sealing surface. Why is that a big deal? Because those burrs will grab a hold of the elastomeric gasket that may be in that cap. When that happens, it folds over on itself, and at that point, it's really deemed inoperable. It's not going to, that gasket's not going to work at all to hold back any product. And the last one we find a lot of when we're trying to work with our clients is that they're not even using the 36-inch pipe wrench. Gino pointed out a second ago about the pamphlet 34 from the BOE. And one of the things that they do recommend is a 36-inch pipe wrench. A lot of times what we're finding is large crescent wrenches, small pipe wrenches, but obviously that there's a reason that the BOE went as far as to specify that is because it does make a difference. You need to have that leverage. Not everybody has the same strength, and therefore there needs to be a minimum leverage that's allowed for that particular piece of equipment. Manly securement training goals. So the biggest part of the goals that we try to strive for when we're providing these training classes to our clients is best practices. Why is that needed? Think about this when we're talking about the manway. The manway connection only has 6 or 8 bolts. If you're to go to any chemical processing plant in North America and you see a 20-inch flange, you're going to have 20 bolts in it, and the bolts are going to be much larger than what you're going to find on a railcar. So you have to find best practices and follow those, because you're basically at a disadvantage. You don't, like, again, you only have 6 or 8 bolts. That flange has to be almost perfect to ensure that it's going to make it from A to B without any incident. The other thing that the goals, it improves safety and productivity. It enhances employee, company, and community safety, which is a big part of today's business environment. We don't want any leaks in any sort of neighborhoods. Contributes to the proper shipments of a DOT qualified package. Again, Gino was mentioning some of the requirements of that. Obviously, a loose bolt is not a qualified package per the DOT. Reduces incidents, accidents, which reduce risk. Again, we're all trying to do that. It's going to reduce operating costs and losses from property damage and fines, which all increase profits. So the question then becomes, how do we get there? And the answer is by providing real, up-to-date, interactive, and relevant training. It's huge to provide that in that context, because you want to, when you provide training, it's not just about a test. You actually, what is it that we want the employee or the trainee to come away with when they leave that class? So that is where we strive to make sure that what we're providing is impactful. And that is, again, our best practice training, which is what we're talking about today, is the manway securement training. The importance of following proven procedures. The manway is a bolted flange joint system. Everything has to work in unison. And what we work with is trying to explain to the loaders or the mechanics, everything has a consequence. If this is not proper, this is what's going to happen. Then you get into the inspection process of the manway. The lid, is it warped? Is it slightly warped? Is, you know, anything defective with the nozzle? Do we have any nicks or gouges? The gasket, is it the proper gasket for the material? The fasteners, huge part of the whole process. But yet, I'll tell you, a lot of the clients that we work with, they don't have any conversation with their loaders at all about the fasteners. It's just a method of closing the lid. It is actually one of the most important aspects of making sure that that lid is leak-free from the time it leaves your facility till the time it gets to your customer's facility. And we spend a lot of time working on it. And probably the biggest part of the best practice training that we not only get feedback from the industry, but we see that it absolutely makes a huge difference is the hands-on demonstration and visual aids. One of the things that, at least in my career, that I grew up with was whenever there was something that was very important, it was told to us. And when we asked the question why, it was because that's the way it is. One of the things that VSP goes out of our way to ensure is that the attendees in our training classes actually get to see what happens if they didn't do something properly. We feel that most employees want to do the right thing. And when they actually get to see it, it makes a huge difference in what they're going to do from that day forward. The other thing is VSP, when we're providing this training and how we ensure some of the compliance for our clients, is we're going to provide a test that is appropriate to the subject covered in 172.704. We have a training video for the manway securement for new employees, so you have that aspect of it. Recurrent training, we try to provide the training to our clients every 3 years to coincide with their function-specific requirements by the DOT. And we do that face-to-face, and that's, to us, face-to-face is critical because we feel that that's where the most impact comes. Again, we have the training videos, we have the hands-on and visual aids. And when you couple all that together with face-to-face, that's when it makes the biggest impact. The other thing is there's a lot of required paperwork to ensure that you meet the standards in 704D. And that is, obviously, it's listed here, the employee name, the most recent completion date, description, copy, location of the training materials that are actually provided to the trainees, name and address of the person performing the training, and then the certificate, the certification that the HazMat employee has been trained and tested. And so how we accomplish all that is to ensure that we provide a class sign-in sheet, we provide a test, and we also provide a certificate of completion at the completion of a test that was properly completed. And so we'll provide all that information to our clients so that should they ever be audited, they have that information exactly the way it's spelled out in 704D. Anyway, with that, I'd like to pass it back over to Gino, and thank you, Gino.
Great job, John. Before I go into the fines and penalties, John mentioned a couple buzzwords, or I call them trigger words, and it's extremely important that each and every person on the call realize that the joint All Trans Tech and VSP, our whole mission is not to make an impression on any shipper, is to make an impact. And when you make an impact on the company and employee, it's a lasting stamp that where they understand that they know that when we tell them something or share something with them, if you can go back to the previous slide, Chris, everything is documented by 49 CFR. And this allows you, the shipper, and well, the person, to have a good foundation if the regulatory agency come in and question something about your processes, procedures, or even your checklist, that you have a resource to go back to that will show them that, yes, you are in compliance with the most current regulation. Okay, Chris, forward. So 49 CFR is updated quarterly. You have one that's updated every 3 or 4 days. So if your facility is not utilizing the most current regulatory manual, this is where the fines and penalties can be assessed not only against you and the employee. So the civil penalty says $89,000 for making a mistake. I made a mistake, and $540 for training violation. Well, when I first started, it was 400 something bucks for a training violation. Well, how do you get 89 for knowing and 540? That's a decrease. Well, what they're telling you is that what's going on with your training? Is it up to par? Is it quality? Are you making an impression? Or are you making an impact on your employees? And then 209, if after everything is said and done, the mistake now causes injury or death. This this is a no-brainer. So that's a civil. I made a mistake. Criminal, that's willful intent. That I woke up with the intention on my mind to cause bodily injury and harm, not only to my coworker, but to someone else as well. And these fines and penalties can be applicable to the person. There's one other one they just added. If you see that first bullet, it says 89,678 per knowing violation. There's a regulatory section where it talks about the 89 is now going to be assessed for training. So when I read that, it's telling me that not only is it training, it's the quality of the training that you're receiving. We all know that CBT training is a great tool, but how is CBT applicable when the regulatory manual is updated quarterly? If you're not adjusting your training to the manual, you're training with outdated information. And the FRA or the regulatory agencies, they know this. So when they come in, they're looking and seeing what's going on. So what happens when you release your package to transportation, they have a good overview of what your company is really about and what you're putting out in transportation. So you're fair game, fair game. So remember, civil, criminal. Civil, I made a mistake. Criminal is willful intent. So here's where we go. Right along with VSP, we specialize, and based on your general purpose, pressure cars, we go in, we do an assessment and tells us exactly what you're doing. That way we tailor the training to specifically to what the packages you're offering. So we don't give you a whole lot of items that you really don't need. When we come in, we make sure we teach you exactly what you're doing, to recognize non-compliant conditions before the car is offered. That's where a good detailed checklist comes in to make sure your employees understand where the regulatory requirements come from and how it's applicable to them. We review your program during the assessment to make sure where your gaps are, and we give you a really detailed report to show you, look, this is where your opportunities for improvement are. Just a real detailed quality assessment. The report is provided. Okay, thank you. Okay, so the report really gives you the nuts and bolts of where the gaps are, along with the regulatory references. So it can be a good discussion, a round table for management as well. Okay, Chris? Oh, let's go down to the fourth bullet. This is where it ties right in with VSP. We offer the same type of processes. So when the FRA or regulatory comes in, they look for those items that VSP talked about. And they also look for a certificate, So those items must be available to the regulatory people. I've seen, ask for your training and I see line items, but there's no documentation of what was covered. It might be covered, but it wasn't available to actually view to determine you're meeting 173.31 requirements. And we also, most important, we assist shippers in creating a very detailed checklist based on your packages, whether they're hazardous or non-hazardous. We can build a checklist specifically for your packages. Okay, closing. We kind of ahead, but all Tech, you know, that's when I came aboard in 2014. It was a great opportunity. I left a great opportunity with the Bureau of Explosive, and now I'm working with these three guys here, well, four guys, and John as well. So it's been a great opportunity. But all Tech has always had the goal of giving the employee knowledge that helps them move ahead. And I truly believe that if your company is not having the vision to move ahead, we're going to become history, or you're going to become stagnant, and that will really take away from the impact that your company can have on the industry. But also, remember, the NARs are the key things in our goodie bag, is that to make sure we don't have a problem with the environment, the company, and the employee, because anytime you have a release, it will cost each one of the three significantly. So Chris, I thank you. John, thank you. If you have anything else, John, if not, I'll give it back to Chris.
No, I don't, but Gino, thank you for, again, allowing me to participate in today's discussion.
Okay. Chris, I know we finished a little early.
That is great. Thank you. We have a few questions that came in. So first question here. But first I want to say thank you, John and Gino, for giving your time to do the presentation. So first question, who is required to keep training documentation? The employer or employee, and for how long?
John, you want me to take care of that, or?
That is all you, Gino.
Thanks, John. Okay, in 172.704, it talks about record keeping, and the actual employer, excuse me, is required to actually keep those training records, as the FRA normally is the one that comes in to review the processes and at each site. The training records are required to be available at that site, either manually or electronically. And when they actually see down the list, I think the certificate John had that was second to last. If you actually can show the certificate, that usually suffices for the FRA inspector, but the records must be kept as long as the employee is actually employed.
That was a great question and great answer. Thank you. All right, we got a few more coming in here.
Okay.
These are kind of they're related. So is a 36-inch wrench needed to attain tool tight, and what is tool tight?
Okay, I'm going to share this answer with John, and I'll try to make it real plain. Pamphlet 34 is titled Suggested Recommended Practices. And that's what it is. It's giving you an option or some, help me out, John, opportunity to secure that tank car. When you say, as John said, 36-inch wrench is recommended because it will give leverage to multiple individuals, but it's only a recommendation. It's only a recommendation. And John, I'll pass that back to you.
No, that's really the right answer, Gino. And what we found is, we've had a lot of customers come to us just because they were having issues with the bottom outlet caps coming loose and getting fines from the FRA. And one of the things that they thought of originally was it would mount it to the fact that maybe the gasket wasn't thick enough or coming into contact with both the gasket, or excuse me, both the nozzle as well as the cap at the same time, and maybe that was what was allowing the cap to be loose. But in most of those cases, what we found when we really did a deep dive was that the 36-inch pipe wrench was not being used, and what they were using was across the board. And so when we worked with them to use the 36-inch pipe wrench, all of a sudden, all of those issues went away. And so, again, like Gino said, it's not a requirement in any way, but it's certainly a best practice. And that's kind of where we always focus, because obviously what VSP does is in no way a requirement. We just try to teach best practices that actually make a difference.
Great. We have a lot of questions rolling in, so I'll keep going. At the beginning of the presentation, under minimum requirements, at the beginning of the presentation, under minimum requirements, one item was before offering a tank for transportation. Sorry, it's cutting off here. I'm going down. Okay, does the person performing the inspection have to be VT level 2 certified? So one of the items before offering a tank was to perform an external visual inspection. Does that person need to be VT level 2 certified?
No, sir. VT is a NDT discipline, if I'm correct, Chris?
Yeah, this is Larry Lohman. And to add to what Gino said, the NDT certification applies to when you're qualifying or maintaining the car under Part 180. These requirements, when you're inspecting the car for shipment, it's per 173.31. So no, NDT methods are not required.
Thanks, Larry.
Thank you for chiming in, Larry. Next question. As a C5 facility receiving equipment from a hazardous service, but not a shipper of hazardous service or equipment, what would be the requirement for that facility?
Again, it's qualification. Yeah, again, these are qualification questions, not a HazMat shipper questions. I mean, we could do a different webinar in the future if we're worried about function-specific training for tank car facilities, but this was geared for the HazMat shipper per 173.31.
Larry, let me ask a question. Chris, can you repeat that question again?
Yes. As a C5 facility receiving equipment from a hazardous service, but not a shipper of a hazardous service or equipment, what would be the requirement for that facility?
Okay, let me ask you this, Larry. If these guys are receiving HazMat in that package at that facility, in order for them to handle that particular package that may have HazMat, I believe they are required to have some kind of training for HazMat. Is that correct, Larry?
Yeah, you're right. No, you're right. I was thinking about C5 receiving the service equipment, but you're right. I wasn't thinking about the fact that it was, I'll call it, with commodity, because it's a dirty car as it's coming in to be worked on. Greg, no, you're absolutely correct. You're right, Gino.
And where I was referenced this, Chris and Larry, is I did an audit at a facility down in the South, and they are bringing tank cars in, and when they removed the valves, they were finding that HazMat was trapped in some of the service valves, and they did not have the proper training on what to do when they encountered the HazMat. So I think they would probably be responsible for training their employees if they are receiving any kind of HazMat product.
No, you're right. You're right. Exactly. Like a ball valve would be a prime example. Until
Yes.
you open and close it, the commodity's
Absolutely.
trapped in around the ball within the body. Yep. Great question.
All right, next question. You highlighted using a video for new hires within 90 days to comply with 172.704C. Does all TransTech have a video to comply with this?
At this time, Chris, no. We are strictly face-to-face. A lot of companies use videos, CBT training, but where we believe that we can make an impact on the customer and his employees is that we come out and give them, because of the rules and regulations change so much. It's just we stray away from having anything locked in place. Whereas John talks about manway closures, a video there, that doesn't change. That process is consistent day in and day out. But when it comes to 49 CFR, the BOE tariff is updated quarterly. The rules and regulations are updated online every 4 days. So at this time, we just chose not to do any videos for HazMat training. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Gino. Next question. Yeah, if anyone has any follow-up to the answers, please let us know. So, are bill of ladings with a signed certification required to be given to customers who receive HazMat by rail? The signed certification for rail is done electronically between the shipper and the railroad. So are they required to be given to customers who receive HazMat by rail?
Well, the customer wants to know what they're receiving. So how do they document that what's in that package aligns with what they've actually requested? Yes, you offer it to the railroad in the full package, and the customer should receive the documentation of what they're actually receiving from the shipper. Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Gino. Next question. Does the regulation require the trainer to be trained by someone else before training their employees? And then quotes, train the trainer. So do the trainers go through training?
No, no, it doesn't. I without having the regulation in front of me, it said the employer can provide the training, or whoever they determine to come in and provide that training. But DOT tries not to get put in a box, because if they tell you you must do something, then either have to write a template or give you a reference, a regulation number. But what the point is, you want to make sure that whoever's giving your employees information are competent or has some background in the subject matter that you want them to learn. I mean, it's just you hire somebody off the street and say, go teach these people. Well, I don't know anything about rail cars. So now this is where we get into the fines and penalties, or NARs. So you want to make sure whoever's out there standing over there providing the information, they know what they're talking about.
Thank you, Gino. Next one here. What was the bulletin that calls for the 89,000 training fine increase? So what was the bulletin for the training fine increase?
Chris, we can provide that. It's in the Federal Register, and I have that. God. I can't call it.
I have the contact info. I have the contact info here. We can provide it later if you want to do it that way.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
We will provide that later. Thank you.
Be glad to do that.
All right. Is there a regulated time that hazardous material training for employees should take? For example, should a new employee's training take 3 hours or so? And should a current employer's refresher training be perhaps an hour? So is there any time, limits and time, do you have to adhere to a certain time frame for the length of the training?
No, Chris, there isn't, but it depends on, and that's all determined during the assessment. If your particular facility is found to be a lot of opportunities, a lot of gaps in DOT understanding, then that would lengthen the amount of time that the training should be, to start from ground roots and take your time and educate these employees. I found people, this is very, very mundane, but simple. If you have someone that's loading, unloading a tank car, and you question them how many sides and how many ends to the tank car, and they tell you 4 or 6, that tells you that you're going to have to start ground roots if you get the opportunity to go in there and educate that employee, because everyone knows that it's 2 sides and 2 ends, and why it's like that needs to be taught. So we try to strive to stay away from putting a time limit, because when you're teaching someone, you teach them based on their level of competency. So it could be from 4 hours to 6 hours. Now, once they get a grasp and we come back or we do refresher training, well, you're only refreshing to the foundation that they have. So it doesn't take that long, but you got to build the foundation on the onset.
Thank you, Gino. Next question, where can we find a current copy of the BOE pamphlet 34?
I can send in we can send in the contact information, Chris.
Okay, we'll follow up on that one as well.
Yes,
Great.
sir.
I have contact information right here.
Okay.
Next question, is a rail car previously containing hazardous material, now only having residue after being emptied by the customer, still considered transporting hazardous material once shipped back to the supplier? Hasn't been commercially cleaned before shipped back to the supplier. So is a car with residue in it considered a hazmat package?
Yes, sir. And 172, 200 under shipping papers, it's a section called residue last contained. Now for tank cars only, that must be in the shipping description. But for any other package other than tank car, you may use that description. What they're telling you at one time, well, let's not go there, but anytime you unload a tank car and you do not clean and purge that tank car of product, it's still treated as a full load. So placards will remain the same, and you will offer that to your particular rail carrier, whether it's BNSF, UP, and they're not required, but the regulation says you must have a copy or receipt of that residue last contained for review to the FRA. And it should show the same product that you received, it should go back out and just have residue last contained at the beginning of the description, telling them that you treat it as a full load, because we don't know what's inside that tank car when it's being offered to the railroad. So the answer is yes.
Sorry, just unmuting. Sometimes it takes a second. Thank you, Gino. We have about 3 more questions I see here. This one directly is, okay, does VSP's manway securement training completely satisfy the DOT's function-specific training?
I guess the quick answer is, in some cases, yes. It really depends on the scope of work that the employee performs. So if you have an employee that, or let's just pick a loader, for example, who inspects the rail car, fills out an inspection form, also does other process work within the facility, you would probably want to capture all of that into function specific. We do have some clients that the only thing that some of the employees do from a hazardous material standpoint is load the car. And so in that case, that would be primarily their only responsibility. So what we always tell our clients is look at this as an opportunity to add to your existing function specific training, and that this is more of an enhancement, because what we find is at least 95% of our current clients or new clients don't do any training when it comes to how to properly secure the manual. And so it is an enhancement to their current program, and that's kind of the way we approach it with them.
Thanks, John. Got another one here. Is it a NAR if the railroad runs a loaded car down a hill into a 50-car train and blows out our properly sized relief valve? So is that an NAR?
Gino,
Well,
you want?
This is Larry. Larry's going to jump in on this one. If the
Pull up
relief
slide
valve
14.
relieves, it is
Larry,
an NAR.
pull up slide 14. And
We're going there now.
okay,
Give us 1 second.
sure. Next one. Oh,
Next one after
I'm
that?
sorry. I got All right, go ahead, Larry. I guess it's 15, Chris.
My initial comment.
There you go.
Yeah, my initial comment is we review a lot of data for industry groups, and one of the items they consider a relief valve relieving in transportation is a non-accident release. However, that's a good point. I guess when you're looking at a 5800 report, a release is a release in transportation. Whether it was accident related or not, it still requires review, because FRA will be looking at it, because again, it was released in transportation. But that's a good point. Is it non-accident related? It doesn't really matter. You've still released product in transportation.
Great. That is the last of the questions we have. So unless one comes through here in the next few seconds, I want to thank everyone for attending this. I hope it was worthwhile and you got something out of it. Like I said previously, there will be a survey sent out either later today or tomorrow. So we appreciate your feedback there. And I want to thank Gino and John and Larry, who's in the room with me here, for taking their time to do the presentation and to answer the questions. And yeah, no more questions came through. So